I didn't argue when my mother told me to cancel my wedding. I didn't cry when my golden boy brother sent me a vendor spreadsheet at 2:11 in the morning like I was his employee. I just smiled and agreed to help. Because the truth is, my brother didn't steal my date to outshine me. He stole it to hide something. And on the day he tried to turn me into his servant, I turned his wedding into a crime scene. My name is Harper Brooks, and I am 32 years old. But sitting at that table in the high-end steakhouse my brother had chosen, I felt like a child being told to give up her favorite toy to the golden child who had broken all of his own. The air in the restaurant smelled of aged beef and expensive cologne, a scent that usually signaled a celebration. Tonight, it smelled like an ambush. My mother took a slow, deliberate sip of her Pinot Grigio, leaving a faint lipstick stain on the rim of the glass. She set it down without looking at me. Her eyes were fixed on the menu, as if the destruction of my happiness was less interesting than the selection of appetizers. "Cancel your wedding. Harper," she said. It was not a question. It was not a request. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same casual tone she would use to tell me to pick up milk on the way home. "You will run logistics for Evan. He needs someone competent to handle the vendors. And frankly, we cannot have the family focus split between two events on the same day." I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving my hands cold where they rested on the white tablecloth. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Evan laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound that made the couple at the next table glance over. He leaned back in his leather chair, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke suit. The gold watch on his wrist caught the dim overhead light. It was a new watch, a heavy, ostentatious piece that probably cost more than the Honda Civic I had driven here. "Don't make a scene, Harp," Evan said, flashing that winning smile that had gotten him out of detention in high school and into corporate boardrooms in his 20s. "Look at the big picture. My wedding is going to be a networking goldmine. The CEO is coming. The board is coming. It is a strategic move for the family legacy." He picked up his knife and pointed it at me. "Besides, Grant can wait. What is the rush? It is not like his schedule is packed with shareholder meetings. What does he do again? Install drywall. Fix leaking sinks. The blue-collar guy can wait another year. His kind is used to waiting in line." I looked at my father. He was usually the one who softened the blows, the one who would slip me $20 when Mom wasn't looking. But tonight, he was cutting his steak with surgical precision, refusing to meet my eyes. "Dad," I said. He sighed, finally looking up. His eyes were tired, but his resolve was iron. "Family comes first. Harper, you know that. And right now, family is Evan. His career is at a tipping point. We all need to push in the same direction." There it was, the unspoken rule of the Brooks household written in neon lights. We were a family, yes, but Evan was the sun, and the rest of us were just planets hoping not to get burned by his orbit. I looked at the three of them. My mother, checking her reflection in her spoon. My father, chewing his steak. My brother, smirking at his reflection in his wine glass. They expected me to cry. They expected me to argue, to raise my voice, to give them the satisfaction of calling me hysterical or selfish. I didn't do any of that. I looked at the black leather folder containing the bill that the waiter had placed in the center of the table. Usually, the expectation was that I, the single one with a steady job and no high-stakes lifestyle, would pick it up, or at least split it. I reached out, my fingers brushing the cool leather. I slid the folder across the table until it hit my father's water glass with a soft clink. I stood up, smoothing down my skirt. "Fine," I said. My mother let out a breath she had been holding. "Oh, good. I knew you would be reasonable. We need to go over the floral arrangements tomorrow morning at 8. They smiled. They thought I had surrendered. They thought I was the good little soldier, falling in line just like I had for 32 years. I turned and walked out of the restaurant, the sound of their relieved chatter fading behind me. I walked into the cool night air, the valet rushing to get my car. My hands were shaking, not from sadness, but from a rage so cold it burned. October 14th. That was my date. I had secured the venue 11 months ago. I had sent the save the date 6 months ago. Evan had only proposed to his fiancée, Sloane, 3 weeks ago, and suddenly, miraculously, his wedding was also booked for October 14th. He claimed it was the only date the venue had left. He claimed it was destiny, but I knew better. Evan didn't believe in destiny. He believed in dominance. He knew I had that date. He picked it specifically because he knew our parents would force me to fold. It wasn't about the calendar. It was about showing me my place. My phone buzzed in my purse before the valet even pulled up. Then it buzzed again, and again. I looked at the screen. It was a text from my mother. Call the florist first thing. Evan wants orchids, not roses, and cancel your caterer. We might be able to get your deposit back if you beg. Then a forwarded email from Evan with a subject line that made my jaw clench. Master vendor spreadsheet. Urgent. The body of the email didn't even say please. It just said, handle the insurance verifications by Friday. Don't mess this up. Harp, they were already treating me like an unpaid intern. I was supposed to dismantle my own dream to build his stage. I got into my car and sat there in the dark, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I thought about the watch on Evan's wrist. I thought about the venue he had booked, the Saint. Regis downtown, a place that charged $500 a plate. I thought about the designer dress Mom had been bragging about ordering for the mother of the groom dance. Something wasn't adding up. Just last month, I had stopped by my parents' house to drop off groceries. My mother had been sitting at the kitchen table, weeping over a utility bill. She had told me the heating bill was $450 and they didn't know where the money was going to come from. She had asked me for a loan. I gave it to her. Of course, I always did. So how did two retirees who cried over a heating bill suddenly have the capital to bankroll a 6-figure wedding for their son? I unlocked my phone and scrolled through the spreadsheet Evan had sent me. The numbers were staggering. $50,000 for flowers, $20,000 for lighting. It was obscene. They thought I was just Harper, the practical daughter, the boring one. They thought my job at Marrow Peak Systems was filing papers and answering phones. When they asked what I did, I told them I worked in compliance assistance. To them, that meant I was a glorified secretary. They had no idea that my title was Senior External Compliance Investigator. They didn't know that companies hired me to find the things their employees tried to bury. They didn't know that I spent my days tracking embezzled funds, uncovering shell companies, and analyzing digital footprints that people thought were erased. My brother didn't steal my date just to outshine me. That was what he wanted me to think. He wanted me to be the jealous little sister, crying about fairness. He wanted me focused on the emotional slight. But looking at the budget on that tiny screen, seeing the reckless spending from a family that was supposedly broke, I realized something else. He needed me busy. He needed me running logistics. He needed me arguing with florists and chasing caterers so that I wouldn't look at where the money was coming from. He made a mistake. He invited a wolf to organize the sheep. I put the car in gear and pulled out of the parking lot. I wasn't going to cancel my wedding, but I wasn't going to tell them that yet. I had a spreadsheet to analyze, and for the first time in my life, I was going to look at my family not as their daughter, but as an investigator. If they wanted me to follow the money, I would follow it all the way to the bottom. I still remember the smell of stale grease and cheap coffee that clung to my hair when I was 16. I worked 20 hours a week at a diner on the edge of town, balancing 3 plates on one arm and dodging grabby hands from truckers who thought a $2 tip bought them permission to touch. Every Friday, I would cash my paycheck, take $40 for gas and lunch money, and put the rest in a white envelope. I would slide it across the kitchen counter to my mother. She would take it with a sigh, mumbling about how hard it was to keep the lights on, how the mortgage was eating them alive. I felt proud. I felt useful. I felt like I was helping us survive. Then came the Tuesday that Evan turned 16. I walked home from a double shift, my feet throbbing in cheap sneakers. to find a brand new sedan sitting in the driveway with a giant red bow on the hood. It wasn't a clunker. It wasn't used. It was fresh off the lot, smelling of factory leather and entitlement. My father was beaming, a camera in his hand. My mother was crying tears of joy, hugging Evan as if he had just returned from war rather than just waking up past noon. When I asked how we could afford a car note when my diner tips were paying the electric bill, my mother turned on me with eyes like ice. "Evan is special," she had said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper so the neighbors wouldn't hear. "He needs reliable transportation for his internships. He is going places. Harper, you are practical. You can take care of yourself, but Evan is destined for greatness. We invest in him." That was the word that stuck with me for 16 years. Invest. I was the utility bill. Evan was the lottery ticket. They didn't love him. I realized that as I sat on my living room floor, surrounded by bridal magazines I was supposed to be throwing away. They didn't love Evan the person. They loved the fantasy of Evan. They were addicted to the idea that he was their savior, the one who would marry rich, become a CEO, and buy them a beach house in Florida to apologize for a lifetime of mediocrity. They fed that fantasy with every dollar they didn't have, terrified that if they stopped spending, the illusion would shatter and they would just be two broke retirees with a narcissistic son. My wedding didn't fit that fantasy. Grant was a general contractor. He owned his own business. He made good money, and he treated me like a queen. But to my parents, he was invisible. He didn't wear suits. He didn't schmooze, so my wedding was just a ceremony. It was cute. It was a nice little party. Evan's wedding. That was a networking event. It was a coronation. My phone lit up on the floor beside me. It was 3:14 in the morning. Another text from the Golden Boy. "Vendor list needs updating. The caterer says they can't do the lobster bisque for 300 people at that price. Fix it. Tell them who I am. No hello. No please. No thank you. Just a command. Delivered into the dark, assuming I was awake and waiting to serve." He treated me exactly how he treated his assistants. Probably worse, because he had to pay his assistants. I didn't reply. I just stared at the screen. 10 minutes later, my mother called. At 3 in the morning, I let it go to voicemail. She called again and again. Finally, I picked up, my voice thick with exhaustion. "Hello, Harper. Why aren't you answering your brother?" Her voice was shrill, panic vibrating in every syllable. "He is stressed out of his mind. He says the caterer is threatening to pull the contract. You need to handle this. Mom, it is 3 in the morning." I said, rubbing my temples. "Don't you start with the attitude," she snapped, the panic shifting instantly to aggression. "This is the most important day of his life. Why are you being so difficult? Is this about your little party? Are you that jealous that you would sabotage your own brother? Jealous?" That was their favorite weapon. If I pointed out unfairness, I was jealous. If I asked for repayment, I was greedy. If I said no, I was ungrateful. "You are being incredibly selfish." "Harper," she continued, her voice low and dangerous, "after everything we have done for you, we raised you, we put a roof over your head, and now, when the family finally has a chance to shine, you want to make it all about you. Just call the caterer. Fix it." I looked at the phone, listening to her breathe, waiting for my submission. She didn't want a daughter. She wanted a fixer. She wanted someone to sweep up the glass so Evan could walk barefoot without getting cut. "Fine," I said. "I will take care of it. I will be useful." I hung up before she could praise me. The silence in my apartment was heavy. I looked over at Grant, who was sleeping soundly in the bedroom, blissfully unaware that my family had just declared war on our happiness. But here is the thing they didn't know. I hadn't canceled anything. Earlier that evening, after the disastrous dinner, I had come home and told Grant everything. I told him about the ultimatum. I told him about the stolen date. I told him they wanted me to erase our day to build Evan's monument. Grant had listened, his jaw tight, his hands clenching into fists. He wanted to go over there and tear the front door off its hinges, but I had stopped him. I told him we were going to do something better. We were going to keep our date, but we were going to change the location. We would move the ceremony to the courthouse in the morning. Just us and 2 witnesses. No expensive venue, no drama. We would be married before Evan even put on his tie. And as for the reception, we would host a small dinner 2 weeks later for the people who actually loved us. But to my family, to them, I was the defeated sister. I was the one who had folded. I walked over to my desk and opened my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the dark room. I opened a new folder and named it simply Project Golden Boy. If they wanted me to run logistics, I would run logistics. I would have access to everything: contracts, invoices, bank transfers, communication logs. I opened the spreadsheet Evan had sent. I started clicking through the tabs. I wasn't looking for lobster bisque pricing. I was looking for discrepancies. I was looking for the truth behind the sudden influx of cash that was funding this 6-figure circus. I took a screenshot of a payment confirmation to a lighting company I had never heard of. I saved an email chain where Evan discussed creative accounting for the venue deposit. I recorded the voicemail my mother had left me, the one where she threatened me, and saved it to the drive. I wasn't collecting these things to argue with them. You can't argue with people who live in a fantasy world. They just rewrite the script to make you the villain. No, I wasn't building an argument. I was building a dossier. I replied to Evan's text. On it. Send me the login for the catering portal so I can negotiate directly. He sent the password within 30 seconds. He thought he was handing off a chore to a subordinate. He didn't realize he was handing the keys to the castle to the arsonist. I smiled. The expression feeling tight and foreign on my face. I would give them exactly what they asked for. I would be the most involved, meticulous, detail-oriented sister they had ever seen. I would track every penny. I would document every lie. And when the bill finally came due, I would make sure I wasn't the one paying it. The blue light of my laptop screen was the only thing illuminating my living room. It was 4 a.m, the dead hour when the world is silent and secrets feel loudest. I had a mug of black coffee cooling next to my mouse, but I didn't need the caffeine. The adrenaline of the hunt was enough. My family thought they had assigned me the role of secretary. They thought I was organizing floral arrangements and debating napkin colors, but they had forgotten what I actually did for a living. You do not give a forensic investigator access to your financial veins and expect her not to check the pulse. I started with the house. It was a colonial on Elm Street that my parents had bought 30 years ago. In every lecture about fiscal responsibility my father had ever given me, that house was the centerpiece. It was their nest egg, their safety net, their pride, by my calculations, based on the market and their payment history. They should have been mortgage-free 2 years ago. I navigated to the county clerk's public records website. It was a clunky, outdated portal that I knew better than the back of my hand. I typed in their address and hit search. The results populated, and my stomach dropped. There was a new deed of trust recorded just 3 weeks ago. It wasn't a small home equity line of credit for repairs. It was a massive cash-out refinance. They had stripped the house of almost every cent of equity it had accrued over 3 decades. They had reset the clock on their mortgage, signing up for 30 more years of payments at an interest rate that was borderline predatory. They were in their late 60s. They would be paying this off until they were nearly 100 years old. I stared at the number on the screen. $450,000. They had liquidated their safety net. But why the wedding was expensive? Sure. But $450,000, that was enough to buy a house, not just rent a ballroom. I moved from the property records to the bank statements. Evan had shared a Dropbox folder with me titled Wedding Resources, ostensibly so I could track vendor payments. But Evan, in his arrogance, had been sloppy. He had uploaded entire PDF statements from my parents' joint checking account instead of just the relevant transaction receipts. I opened the statement from last month. It was a slaughterhouse. I saw a deposit from Fidelity Net Benefits. It was a lump sum transfer of $80,000. But looking at the descriptor line, I saw the code for an early withdrawal. I did the math in my head. To get $80,000 cash in hand after the mandatory 20% federal withholding and the 10% early withdrawal penalty, They must have drained over $110,000 from their retirement principal. They were burning their future to keep Evan warm for one night. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in a year. It was early, but I knew Marcus would be awake. He worked in high-risk escrow for a commercial bank in Chicago. "Brooks," he answered on the second ring, his voice gravelly. "You know it is for a... right? You either killed someone or you found money." "Hypothetically," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "If you saw a couple in their late 60s, do a 90% loan-to-value cash-out refinance and liquidate a 401k in the same month, what would you call that?" There was a pause on the line. I could hear him lighting a cigarette. "I would call that financial suicide," Marcus said. "That is a desperation move. Harper, that is the kind of liquidity generation you see when someone is being blackmailed, or they are about to flee the country, or they have been sold a bridge by a con artist. Why?" "Just a case I'm looking at," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Thanks, Marcus." "Be careful," he warned, before hanging up. People who bleed themselves dry that fast usually get desperate when the cash runs out. I hung up and looked back at the spreadsheet. The money was pouring in from the house, from the retirement accounts, and it was pouring out just as fast. I turned my attention to the expenses tab. This was where I was supposed to be working. My job was to ensure these vendors were paid on time. But as I scrolled down the list of company names, my investigator brain started to itch. It is a specific feeling, a prickle at the back of the neck that tells you the pattern is wrong. Most of the names were standard: The Saint, Regis, Wolfgang Puck Catering, Valid, High-End, Expensive, but then there were others: Lumiere Ambiance Lighting, Deposit $25,000, Apex Strategic Logistics, Rush Fee $15,000, Velvet Rope Security, Retainer $18,000. The amounts were rounded, too clean. Real invoices rarely end in perfectly round numbers like 25,000. They have taxes, service fees, odd cents. I opened a new tab and went to the Secretary of State's business search portal. I typed in Lumiere Ambiance Lighting. No results found. I tried variations. Nothing. Finally, I found a Lumiere LLC registered 3 states away, but the status was listed in red letters: dissolved admin. The company had been shut down by the state for failure to pay taxes 2 years ago. Why was my brother writing a $25,000 check to a ghost I moved to Apex Strategic Logistics? This one existed. It was an active LLC formed only 4 months ago. I clicked on the Agent for Service of Process link to find the physical address. It wasn't a warehouse. It wasn't an office park. I plugged the address into Google Maps and switched to Street View. It was a UPS store in a strip mall in Nevada, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a discount vape shop. It was a Dropbox, a virtual office. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. This wasn't just bad budgeting. This wasn't just my parents being foolish with their savings to please their golden child. I checked the invoice for Velvet Rope Security. The address listed was a residential home in a suburb that I knew was zoned strictly for single-family housing. I sat back, the leather of my chair creaking in the silence. The total amount sent to these 3 questionable entities was nearly $60,000 in the last 2 weeks alone. And that was just the deposits. If this were a legitimate wedding, that money would be locking down services, but these services didn't seem to exist. The money was leaving my parents' accounts, verified by the bank statements, and it was landing in the accounts of companies that were nothing more than paper shells and mailboxes. My brother wasn't just spending their money, he was laundering it. He was taking the equity from their home and the security of their retirement, filtering it through these fake vendor contracts, and moving it somewhere else. But where and why Evan was a mid-level manager? He made decent money, but he lived like he was royalty. He always had the new watch, the new car, the trips to Tulum. We all assumed he was just bad with credit cards. But this was structured. This was deliberate. I looked at the vendor list again. There were 5 more companies I hadn't checked yet. My mother thought she was paying for lighting and security. She thought she was investing in Evan's future image. She had no idea she was pouring her life savings into a black hole that Evan had dug right under her feet. I saved every web page. I downloaded every corporate filing. I took screenshots of the Google Street View of the UPS store. I created a subfolder in my encrypted drive named Shell Game. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. I had started this night thinking my brother was a selfish narcissist. Now, looking at the trail of dissolved companies and rounded numbers, I realized he was something much more dangerous. He wasn't just stealing my wedding date, he was stealing their lives. And if these vendors were just the front door, I needed to find out who was standing in the back room holding the bag. Because you don't set up a network of shell companies just to skim a few grand off a wedding budget. You do it to hide a mountain. I reached for my coffee. It was stone cold. I drank it anyway. The night was far from over, and I had a feeling the rabbit hole I had just fallen into didn't have a bottom. The pounding on my door started at 9 in the morning on Sunday. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a demand for entry. The kind of rhythmic thudding that assumed whoever was on the other side had no choice but to open up. I checked the peephole, though I already knew who it was. The Brooks family phalanx had arrived. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Evan stood front and center, wearing a navy suit that cost more than my first car, flanked by my parents like they were his personal Secret Service detail. "You are not answering your texts," Evan said, pushing past me without waiting for an invitation. He brought the smell of expensive aftershave and condescension into my living room. "I was sleeping," I said, closing the door behind them. "It is Sunday. Sleep is for people who don't have a legacy to build." Evan scoffed. He walked around my apartment, picking up a ceramic coaster and inspecting it with a sneer before dropping it back onto the table. It made a loud clatter. "God, this place is small. How do you breathe in here? It smells like mediocrity." My mother marched to the kitchen island and set down her oversized purse. "We are not here to discuss real estate, Evan. We are here because your sister needs an attitude adjustment." She turned to me, her face pinched tight. "The florist called. They said you haven't confirmed the orchid upgrade yet. Do you want your brother's wedding to look like a discount funeral?" "I sent the email an hour ago," I lied smoothly. I hadn't sent it because I was too busy tracking the shell company Evan had wired a deposit to the night before. "Where is Grant? I thought he would be here." Evan laughed. A short, sharp sound. "Probably out fixing a toilet somewhere, right? Or is he framing a wall today? I honestly lose track of which manual labor he's performing to scrape by." My father chuckled. A low rumble of agreement. "Honest work," my father said, though his tone suggested it was the kind of work one should be ashamed of. "But not everyone can be an executive." I felt a flash of heat in my chest, but I forced my face to remain blank. Grant wasn't just a handyman. He owned a high-end contracting firm that handled commercial renovations for half the city, but my family never bothered to ask about his business. To them, if you wore work boots, you were beneath them. "He is working," I said simply. Evan turned to me, his eyes gleaming with a manic sort of energy. He looked wired, his pupils slightly dilated. "Well, tell him to take the day off on October 14th. Actually, tell him to buy a better suit. I don't want him looking like hired help in the photos. The CEO is going to be there. Harper, the entire board of directors." He paced the small length of my living room, gesturing wildly. "By Christmas, I will be director of sales. It is a lock. This wedding isn't just a party. It is my inauguration. When the CEO sees the scale of this event, the class, the connections, he will know I am the only choice to lead the division." I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. "Who told you that you are getting the director spot? Did HR post the opening?" Evan stopped pacing. He looked at me with a pitying smile. "Who told me? No one had to tell me. Harper, I am the chosen one. It has always been the plan. I generate the numbers. I drive the culture. This promotion is just a formality." I looked at him. Really looked at him. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip despite the air conditioning. I saw the slight tremor in his hand as he adjusted his silk tie. He didn't look like a future director. He looked like a man standing on a trap door, frantically trying to nail it shut before he fell through. The numbers I had seen last night flashed in my mind. The dissolved companies, the fake invoices. He wasn't generating numbers. He was fabricating them. And he was using our parents' retirement money to stage a wedding that would dazzle his bosses enough to keep them from looking too closely at his sales reports. "So," I said slowly, "you need this wedding to be perfect so they don't ask questions." My mother stepped forward, closing the distance between us. Her eyes were hard. "Stop it. Stop acting jealous. I know it eats you up inside that Evan is succeeding while you are settled, but for once in your life, put your petty envy aside." She grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "You are finally useful. Harper, we have spent 30 years waiting for you to do something extraordinary. And you never did. But now you can help Evan be extraordinary. That is your contribution. Do not ruin it. You are finally useful." The words hung in the air, toxic and heavy. For years, I thought I was the disappointment because I wasn't brilliant. But that wasn't it. I was the disappointment because I was real, and they preferred the counterfeit. And then it clicked. The date. October 14th. It wasn't just about stealing my thunder. It wasn't just about his ego. October 14th was the end of the fiscal quarter for his company. I knew that because my company, Marrow Peak Systems, often audited firms on that same cycle. He needed a massive distraction right when the books were closing. He needed a life event so loud and blinding that if any discrepancies popped up, he could blame it on the chaos of the wedding or use the wedding connections to smooth it over. And he needed me to be his logistics manager, not because I was good at it, but because if I was busy running his circus, I wouldn't have time to look at the clowns. If I had been focused on my own wedding, I might have noticed that he was borrowing money from Mom and Dad. I might have asked why he needed a loan, by hijacking my date. He forced me to look at his spreadsheet, thinking I would just complain about the work. He never imagined I would audit it. He didn't want to outshine me. He wanted to bury me in tasks so I wouldn't see that he was burying himself. I looked at my mother, then at my father, and finally at Evan, who was checking his reflection in my hallway mirror. They were all so confident. They thought they had broken me. I let my shoulders slump. I let the fight drain out of my face. I softened my voice to the dull, defeated tone they loved to hear. "Fine," I said. "You are right. I will handle the vendors. I will make sure the CEO is impressed." The tension in the room snapped instantly. My father smiled, patting me on the shoulder awkwardly. "Good girl. That is the team's spirit." "Make sure you confirm the orchids," Evan said, checking his watch. "I have a brunch meeting. We are done here." They swept out of my apartment as quickly as they had arrived, leaving silence in their wake. I watched through the window as they got into Evan's least luxury SUV. They looked like a happy, successful family. I locked the door. I threw the deadbolt. I walked to my desk and picked up my phone. My hands were steady. My heart was cold. I dialed Grant. He answered on the first ring. The background noise wasn't the sound of saws or hammers. It was the hushed quiet of a corporate boardroom. The rustle of papers, the low murmur of lawyers. "Did they leave?" Grant asked. "They just left," I said. "They think I am the obedient little sister. They think I am defeated." "Good," Grant said. His voice had an edge to it that I rarely heard the sound of a man who was done playing nice. "Let them think that—" "Evan told me the CEO is coming to the wedding," I said. "He thinks he is getting a promotion." "He is going to get something. All right," Grant replied. "I am looking at the signature page right now. Harper." "Is it done?" I asked. "The ink is wet," Grant said. "I just closed the deal. The holding company that owns the St. Regis downtown. It is now part of the Holloway Group's portfolio. We take legal possession of the venue management contracts effective immediately." A dark smile spread across my face. Evan had booked the venue to show off his power. He had no idea that the man he called a blue-collar guy had just bought the building he was standing in. "It is time," I said. It is time, Grant agreed. I will bring home takeout. We have a lot of paperwork to review. I hung up the phone and looked at the wedding resources folder on my laptop. Evan wanted me to run his wedding. I would do better than that. I was going to run it right into the ground, and I was going to use his own receipts to dig the hole. Monday morning at Marrow Peak Systems did not start with coffee and gossip. It started with a biometric scan. I stood before the glass doors of the 30th floor, the one my family thought was an administrative archiving center, and pressed my thumb against the reader. The light swept green, and the heavy doors hissed open. My ID badge didn't say assistant. It said Senior External Compliance Investigator. To my parents, I was the girl who organized files. To the corporate world, I was the person you called when the numbers didn't add up, and you were terrified it was coming from inside the house. I specialized in forensic auditing and internal theft detection. My job was not to be liked. My job was to be invisible until it was too late to hide the evidence. I walked to my office, a glass-walled enclosure at the end of the hall that required a second keycard to enter. I sat down, the ergonomic chair adjusting to my weight, and logged into the mainframe. I wasn't here to check my email. I was here to work on active case file 774-B. The target company was a mid-sized logistics and sales firm called Vanguard Solutions. They had hired Marrow Peak 3 months ago because their inventory was shrinking and their overhead was bloating, but they couldn't find the leak. Vanguard Solutions was where my brother Evan worked. Evan didn't know I was the lead investigator on his company's audit. To him, my job was just compliance, a word so boring he tuned it out whenever I mentioned it. He had no idea that for the past 90 days, I had been systematically dissecting his division's performance. I pulled up the sales dashboard on my primary monitor. Evan was the regional sales manager. According to the quarterly reports he bragged about at every Sunday dinner, his department was shattering records. He claimed to be a rainmaker, a genius who could sell ice to a polar bear. I looked at the raw data. It was beautiful. It was perfect. It was impossible. The logistics market had been stagnant for 6 months. Competitors were reporting a 10% drop in volume. Fuel costs were up. Shipping lanes were clogged. Yet, Evan's division showed a vertical growth curve that defied every economic indicator in the sector. I didn't look for math errors. Amateurs look for math errors. Fraudsters check their math. I looked for patterns. I filtered his top 10 new clients for the fiscal year. These were the accounts that had supposedly pushed him into the director conversation. The names were impressive Apex Horizon Group, Blue Water Logistics, Trinity Global Holdings. I clicked on Trinity Global Holdings. On the surface, it looked legitimate. There were invoices for consulting services and strategic partnership fees, totaling $150,000 over the last 4 months. I ran the tax identification number through our internal verification tool. It returned a match for a registered entity in Delaware, standard practice for corporations. But then I cross-referenced the billing address with satellite imaging. The headquarters of this massive global holding company was a single-story stucco building in a strip mall in Phoenix, Arizona. A sign above the door read, "Mailboxes, etc." I felt that familiar coldness settle in my stomach. It was the same feeling I had when I looked at the wedding vendor list, but this was worse. This wasn't just my parents' retirement money. This was corporate embezzlement. I moved to Blue Water Logistics. The website was a template, full of stock photos of container ships and smiling men in hard hats. The About Us section was generic lorem ipsum text that had been hastily rewritten. The domain had been registered 6 months ago. I pulled the payment records. Vanguard Solutions wasn't shipping products to these clients. Vanguard was paying them. The money was listed under marketing development funds and vendor retainers. Evan was authorizing massive payouts to these shell companies, claiming they were necessary to secure the contracts. He was bleeding his own company dry, disguising the theft as the cost of doing business. I opened a command line window and ran a trace on the banking routing numbers associated with the payments. Money leaves a trail. No matter how much you try to sweep it, it hops from account to account, but it always has to land somewhere. The funds from Vanguard went to Trinity Global. Then Trinity transferred 80% of the balance to a secondary account at a credit union in the Cayman Islands. I couldn't access the Cayman account directly without a warrant, which would take weeks, but I could look at the domestic routing path. I stared at the screen. The intermediary bank for Blue Water Logistics used a specific routing number ending in 8842. That number triggered a memory. It wasn't a work memory, it was personal. I unlocked my phone and opened my personal banking app. I scrolled back 11 months to a frantic phone call I had received from Evan. He had told me his transmission had blown on the highway, that he was stranded, that he didn't have his wallet. He had begged me to wire him $2,000 for the repair shop immediately. I found the transaction. Transfer to E. Brooks, amount $2,000, routing number 8842. I stopped breathing for a second. The account that was receiving the embezzled funds from the shell companies wasn't some anonymous offshore banker. It was an account my brother had control over. It was the same account he used for his personal emergencies. Evan wasn't just inflating his sales numbers to look good. He was stealing directly from his employer. He created fake clients, authorized payments to them from his marketing budget, and then routed that money back into his own pocket. He was stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then it hit me. The wedding. The wedding wasn't just a party. It was the wash cycle. He was using the stolen corporate money to pay the fake wedding vendors I had found on Saturday night. He was cycling the dirty money through the wedding contracts to make it look like legitimate spending, and then likely pulling it back out or paying off the debts he had incurred to set up the scheme. He was building a house of cards inside a house of cards. I looked around my quiet office. The hum of the servers was the only sound. My brother thought he was a genius. He thought he was the golden boy who could do no wrong. He thought his little sister was just a paper pusher who would be impressed by his title. He had no idea that the person he had bullied into organizing his wedding was the one person equipped to send him to federal prison. I didn't cry. I didn't feel conflicted. I felt the cold, hard clarity of the law. I inserted a secure encrypted drive into my terminal. I didn't just take screenshots. Screenshots can be faked. I initiated a full forensic preservation of the data. I downloaded the server logs showing Evan's user ID authorizing the payments. I downloaded the email headers where he approved the invoices. I downloaded the IP address history proving he accessed these shell accounts from his work laptop. I established a chain of custody that would stand up in any court in America. The printer in the corner whirred to life, spitting out page after page of damning evidence. The sound was rhythmic, like a gavel hitting a block. I picked up the stack of papers, the edges warm in my hands. It was heavy. It weighed as much as a future. Evan wanted to be the center of attention. He wanted the CEO at his wedding. He wanted everyone to witness his ascent. I would make sure he got his wish. The CEO would be there, and thanks to the file I was currently binding with a calm, steady hand, the CEO would see exactly who Evan Brooks really was. I placed the file into my briefcase and locked it. My shift wasn't over. I had work to do. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't working for my family. I was working for the truth. I placed the two spreadsheets side by side on my dual monitors. On the left screen was the audit file for Vanguard Solutions, the forensic map of my brother's corporate theft. On the right screen was the wedding master list Evan had ordered me to manage. It was a puzzle that only someone with my specific clearance could see. To the naked eye, they looked like two completely different worlds. One was full of shipping manifests and consulting fees. The other was full of centerpieces and string quartets. But when I overlaid the data, the picture snapped into a terrifying focus. I started searching for the vendor names from the corporate audit within the wedding database, in the corporate file. Evan had authorized payments to a company called Apex Horizon Group for logistics consulting, in the wedding file. There was a vendor listed as Apex Strategic Events, hired for on-site coordination. I pulled the tax identification numbers for both. They were identical. My breath hitched. He wasn't even trying to hide it. He was using the same shell company to bill his employer for fake consulting and his parents for fake wedding planning. I kept digging. In the corporate file, There was a recurring monthly payment to Lumiere Technical Services. In the wedding file, there was a massive deposit paid to Lumiere Ambiance Lighting, the address for both the same post office box in Nevada I had found the night before. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The wedding wasn't just a lavish party to stroke his ego, it was a money laundering machine. It was the layering phase of a financial crime. By mixing the stolen corporate funds with our parents' legitimate, albeit borrowed money, Evan was creating a fog. If anyone asked why Apex was receiving large wire transfers, he could point to the wedding and say it was for services rendered. He was using the chaos of the event, the hundreds of transactions, the high-pressure deadlines, the emotional smokescreen to wash the dirty money he was stripping from Vanguard Solutions. He was funneling cash from his employer into these shell companies, then paying himself and his accomplices, and using the wedding expenses to justify the outflow if anyone ever looked. It was brilliant. In a sociopathic sort of way, I needed to know his mindset. I needed to know if this was a desperate last-minute scramble or a long-term plan. I logged into the email account he had given me access to for vendor communications. I ignored the inbox and went straight to the drafts and trash folders. People always forget to empty the trash. I found a thread from 2 weeks ago, an exchange between Evan and a user named Kyle M_88, presumably a college friend or a partner in the scheme. The subject line was simply timeline. I opened the email Evan had sent. Don't worry about the audit rumors. By the time they look at Q3, the wedding will be over. I am pushing everything through as event logistics. After the wedding, nobody will question the budget. It will just look like reckless celebration spending. I need you to invoice for the rush fees by Friday. We need to clear the accounts before the merger talk gets serious. I stared at the phrase, "It will just look like reckless celebration spending." He was counting on people thinking he was just a spoiled brat. He was banking on the fact that our family, and his company, would attribute the insane spending to his vanity, not his criminality. He was using his own reputation as a narcissist as a cover for felony fraud. I went back to the spreadsheet and filtered for the term rush fee. It was everywhere. Rush fee $12,000 to Apex. Expedited service charge $8,000 to Lumiere. Priority processing $15,000 to a catering consultancy that didn't seem to have a website. These weren't real fees. You do not pay a rush fee for lighting 6 months in advance. These were extraction payments. He was draining the accounts as fast as he could because he knew something I hadn't realized yet. Vanguard was in merger talks. And merger talks meant due diligence. And due diligence meant auditors like me would be coming for him. He was cashing out and hoping the wedding would bury the paper trail. I minimized the spreadsheets and opened the contract for the St. Regis, the venue he was so proud of. I needed a weapon. I needed a way to stop this that didn't involve me standing up in a restaurant and screaming accusations that my parents wouldn't believe. I read through the 40-page document, my eyes scanning for specific legal keywords. I found them on page 32, Clause 14b, Conduct and Morality. The venue reserves the right to cancel the event immediately and retain all monies paid if the client, or any principal party associated with the event, is found to be engaged in illegal activity, fraud, or misrepresentation that could damage the reputation of the venue. Clause 19, False representation. If any funds used to secure services are found to be derived from illicit sources, this contract is null and void, and the client accepts full liability for legal damages. I sat back. This was it. This was the trapdoor. My phone buzzed. It was Grant. "I just left the lawyers," Grant said. His voice was calm, the voice of a man who held all the aces. "The acquisition of the venue management group is finalizing. As of next week, my holding company will technically own the debt and the operational contracts for the St. Regis. Does that mean what I think it means?" I asked. "It means," Grant said, "that I am not just the guy fixing the toilet anymore. I am the landlord. And I have the power to enforce every single clause in existing contracts." "Perfect," I said, "because I just found the clause we need." Evan isn't just breaching contract. He is funding the event with stolen money. If we trigger the morality clause, the wedding isn't just canceled, it becomes a crime scene. Do you want to pull the plug now? Grant asked. We can shut him down today. No, I said, looking at the date on my screen. If we stop him now, he spins it. He blames a misunderstanding. He cries to Mom and Dad that the mean venue canceled on him. He plays the victim. I looked at the invoice for the final payment, due on the night of the reception. We wait, I told Grant. We wait until he is standing on that stage. We wait until he thinks he has gotten away with it. We wait until the audit is complete and the federal indictments are ready to be unsealed. That is cold, Harper, Grant said, but I could hear the pride in his voice. He stole my date, I said, closing the laptop. He stole our parents' retirement. He stole from his company. I am not going to just cancel his party. I am going to let him throw it, and then I am going to let him pay the price. I hung up. The plan was set. I wouldn't fight him with emotion. I would fight him with his own signature. But a thought nagged at me, an open loop in my otherwise perfect case. Evan's email mentioned merger talks, if he knew about the merger. He might suspect an audit was coming sooner than usual, if he knew the walls were closing in. What was his exit strategy? You don't steal this much money just to pay for a party. You steal this much money to run. I looked at the honeymoon tab on the spreadsheet. A one-way private charter to a non-extradition country. I made a note to check the flight manifests next. If Evan Brooks thought he was going to catch a flight, he was going to be very disappointed when he realized I was the one clearing him for takeoff. I met Sloane Mercer at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the bridal boutique, where she was supposed to be having her final fitting. My mother believed we were there to pick up her veil. In reality, Sloane had texted me at 6 a.m. with a message that chilled me to the bone. I need to talk to you. Alone. Don't tell Evan. Sloane was the picture of the perfect society bride. Blonde, poised, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who seemed to have been manufactured in a factory that produced trophy wives for aspiring executives. My parents adored her because she nodded when they spoke and looked good in photos. I had always assumed she was just as shallow as the world she inhabited. I was wrong. When I slid into the booth opposite her, Sloane wasn't wearing her usual mask of polite disinterest. Her eyes were rimmed with red, and her hands, clutching a paper cup of black tea, were trembling. She looked less like a bride and more like a witness looking for a safe house. "Is everything okay?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "Did the dress not fit?" Sloane let out a ragged breath, looking over her shoulder as if she expected Evan to walk through the door. "I don't think Evan is who your parents think he is. Harper?" I sat very still. "What do you mean? He is?" She struggled for the word. "He is scared. For the last month. He has been acting like a hunted animal. He wakes up at 3 a.m. checking his phone. He changed all his passwords last week, even the Netflix password, which makes no sense, and he keeps muttering about the audit. He thinks I can't hear him when he is on the balcony, but I hear him screaming at people to clean the logs." I took a sip of my coffee to hide the spike in my pulse. "People get stressed before weddings. Sloane, it is a big event." "This isn't wedding stress," she hissed, leaning across the table. "This is fear, and it is not just that." She reached into her designer bag and pulled out her phone. She hesitated, then unlocked it and pushed it across the table toward me. "3 days ago, a man called me," she whispered. "He thought he was calling Evan's partner. He didn't mean romantic partner. He meant business partner. He started talking about the Apex transfer and asked if the second tranche had cleared the escrow account yet. When I said, 'This is Sloane, Evan's fiancé,' he hung up immediately." My blood ran cold. Apex. That was the shell company I had identified in the corporate audit. "Did you save the number?" I asked, my voice calm, the professional investigator taking over. "Yes," she said. I screenshotted the call log before Evan deleted it. He went through my phone that night. He wiped the call history, but I had already sent the picture to my secret email. She showed me the image. I memorized the number instantly. It wasn't a random spam caller. It was the registered contact number for the Lumiere Ambiance Lighting LLC, the fake lighting company that had received $25,000 of my parents' money. I pulled out my own phone under the table and ran the number through the Vanguard Solutions vendor database I had cached. It was a direct match. The person calling Sloan wasn't a wedding vendor. He was Evan's accomplice in the embezzlement scheme. I looked at Sloan. She was terrified. She wasn't a villain in this story. She was a prop that had started to ask questions. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "You are marrying him in 5 days." "I don't want to go to jail," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know what he is doing, Harper, but I know it is illegal. I signed papers. He made me sign vendor contracts as a guarantor because he said his credit was tied up in investments. If he goes down, my name is on those invoices." She grabbed my hand, her grip desperate. "I want a clean exit. I want to leave him, but you know Evan, you know how he is. If I leave him now, days before the wedding, he will destroy me. He will tell everyone I was the one stealing. He will sue me. He will ruin my reputation so badly I will never get a job or a loan again. He is vindictive, Harper. You know he is." I did know. Evan didn't just burn bridges. He blew them up with the people still standing on them. "You have 2 choices. Sloan," I said, my tone shifting from sister-in-law to federal witness handler. "Choice 1. You stay quiet, you marry him, and when the FBI kicks down his door, and you will be standing right next to him as a co-conspirator. Your signature is on the fraud documents. You go to prison." Sloan flinched. Tears spilled onto her cheeks. "Choice 2, I continued, relentless. "You help me. You become a cooperating witness. You give me everything you have, the contracts, the timeline, the names. If you help me stop him, I can make sure the authorities know you were coerced. You walk away with your freedom, and Evan takes the fall alone." Sloan stared at me, searching my face. "You are investigating him. I thought you were just doing logistics." "I am doing logistics," I said coldly. "I am coordinating his downfall. Are you in, or are you out?" Sloan wiped her face with a napkin. She took a deep breath, and the trembling in her hands stopped. She reached into her bag again and pulled out a manila envelope. "I made copies," she said, sliding the envelope to me. "These are the contracts he made me sign, and the middleman he talks to. His name isn't Kyle. It is a guy named Marcus Vane. He is the one who set up the shell companies." I opened the envelope just an inch. I saw the letterhead for Apex Strategic Events. I saw Sloan's signature, shaky and pressured, next to Evan's bold, arrogant scrawl. This was the smoking gun. This linked the corporate theft directly to the wedding expenses. "You did the right thing," I said, tucking the envelope into my tote. "Now, listen to me carefully. You are going to go through with the wedding." "What?" Sloan gasped. "I can't marry him." "You won't," I promised. "The ceremony isn't legally binding until the license is signed and filed. We are going to let the show run until the very last second. We need him to feel safe. We need him to stand in front of everyone, the CEO, our parents, the world, and think he has won. That is when we catch him. If we move too early, he runs. If we catch him at the wedding, he is trapped." "What do I do?" she asked. "You play the part," I said. "You put on the dress, you walk down the aisle, you smile, and when the moment comes, you step aside and let me handle the rest." Sloan nodded slowly. "The toast," she said. "He is obsessed with his toast. He has been practicing it in the mirror. He says it is going to be the moment his life changes." "Oh, it will be," I said, a grim smile touching my lips. "I can promise him that." "There is one more thing," Sloan said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He gave me a thumb drive to hold. He said if anything ever happened to him, I should throw it in the river. He said it was insurance. Do you have it?" "It is in my safety deposit box," she said. "I will get it to you tomorrow." I looked at this woman who I had judged as a shallow accessory. She was terrified. Yes, but she was smarter than Evan gave her credit for. He thought she was just another object he owned. He didn't realize she was the one handing me the key to his cell. "Get me that drive," I said. "And Sloan?" "When the floor drops out from under him, don't look down." We stood up. She put her sunglasses back on. The mask of the perfect bride sliding back into place, but now there was steel behind the silk. "Thank you, Harper," she said. "Don't thank me yet," I replied. "Save it for the reception." I watched her walk out of the coffee shop, back to the world of tulle and lies. I finished my cold coffee. I had the contracts. I had the witness. I had the motive. Now, all I needed was the stage. And thanks to my brother's ego, he had built a magnificent one. The alarm went off at 6 in the morning on October 14th. For 11 months. I had dreaded this specific date. I had imagined waking up with a pit in my stomach, knowing that while I sat in my apartment, my brother was living out the day I had planned for myself. I had imagined the bitterness choking me. But when I opened my eyes, the bitterness was gone. I looked over at Grant. He was already awake, watching me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. "Happy wedding day. Harper," he whispered. "We are not letting him steal your day." Grant had told me 3 nights ago, his voice fierce in the quiet of our kitchen. "He can have the ballroom. He can have the overpriced chicken and the fake friends, but he cannot have the marriage. That belongs to us." We didn't go to the street. Regis, we went to the city courthouse, a drab gray building that smelled of floor wax and bureaucracy. It was perfect. I didn't wear a white gown with a 6-foot train. I wore a cream-colored pantsuit I had bought on sale. Grant wore his best charcoal suit, the one he usually saved for client meetings. We had 2 witnesses, Marcus, my banker friend who had helped me track the mortgage fraud, and Sloan. Yes, Sloan. She had sneaked out of the hotel suite where the bridal party was getting ready. Claiming she needed an emergency coffee run, she stood there in her designer tracksuit, holding a bouquet of grocery store daisies she had bought for me, tears streaming down her face. "Do you, Harper Brooks, take Grant Holloway to be your lawfully wedded husband?" the judge asked. She was a stern woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, completely unaware that she was officiating the most important part of a revenge plot. "I do," I said, and I meant it more than anything I had ever said in my life. "I do," Grant said, squeezing my hand. We exchanged simple gold bands. Not the flashy diamonds Evan had bought for Sloan with stolen money. We signed the license. It was done, at 9:15 in the morning. While my mother was likely screaming at a makeup artist about her eyeliner, I became a married woman. I hugged Sloan. "Go back," I told her. "Be the bride. I will see you at the venue." "I am terrified," she whispered. "Don't be," I said. "You are not the target. You are the bait." Grant kissed me. A long, slow kiss that sealed the promise we had made. Then he looked at his watch. "I have to go meet the legal team at the venue office. I will see you on the battlefield. Mrs. Holloway." I drove to the Saint, Regis alone. By the time I walked into the bridal suite, I was no longer the glowing bride. I was Harper, the logistics manager. I was the drab, reliable sister here to serve the golden boy. My mother barely looked up when I entered. "You are late," she snapped. "Evan is freaking out about the seating chart. Go fix it." "On it," I said, my voice flat. I carried a thick white binder under my arm, to my family. This was the wedding Bible, the master plan of the day. I handed it to my father, who was pacing nervously by the window. "Here is the timeline. Dad," I said, "everything is under control. The vendors are all paid. The schedule is tight." He took it, looking relieved. "Good job. Harper, I knew you would step up. It is good to see you finally putting the family first." I almost laughed. If he only knew what was actually in that binder. It wasn't just a timeline. It was a forensic map. Every vendor listed in there had a corresponding tab in my investigation file. I went to find Evan. He was in the groom's suite, surrounded by his groomsmen, a collection of frat brothers and sales guys who all looked like carbon copies of him. He was nursing a scotch, already sweating through his undershirt. "Harper," he yelled when he saw me. "Where have you been?" "The lighting guys." "Lumiere, they are asking for another $5,000 for emergency power riggings. They sent me an email." "I saw it," I said, pulling out my phone. "But Evan, I need you to confirm that my limit on the credit card Mom gave me is maxed out. I need you to reply to their email and authorize the overage so I can show it to Dad later." "Just pay it," he shouted. "I don't have time for emails." "I can't," I lied smoothly. "The bank flagged the last transfer. They need written confirmation from the account holder that the vendor is legitimate and the charge is approved. Just hit reply and type, 'Approved.' It will take 2 seconds." Evan groaned, pulled out his phone, and typed furiously. "There, done. Now get out of my face." I walked out of the suite and checked my email. There it was, from Evan Brooks to accounting-lumiere-lighting.com, subject re-emergency. Power rigging invoice message approved. I spoke to Marcus yesterday. He knows the drill. Just process the damn payment. I smiled. He had just handed me the final nail. By mentioning Marcus, his accomplice, and admitting he had spoken to the vendor yesterday outside of official channels, he proved he had a personal relationship with the shell company. A normal groom doesn't have the direct line to the finance guy of a lighting company. A normal groom doesn't know the internal drill. He had just confirmed he was the puppeteer, not just the client. I went to a quiet corner of the hotel lobby and opened my laptop. I connected to the secure VPN of Marrow Peak Systems. I attached the email he had just sent. I attached the scanned contracts Sloan had given me. I attached the call logs, the bank statements, the shell company registrations, and the corporate audit findings. I addressed the email to the General Counsel of Vanguard Solutions, copying the head of internal audit at Marrow Peak Systems, and for good measure, the FBI's white-collar crime tip line portal, where I had already opened a preliminary file. Subject urgent, active embezzlement and money laundering in progress. Subject Evan Brooks. I hit send. The digital packet whooshed away. Carrying my brother's future with it, I closed the laptop. My hands were steady. I felt a strange sense of calm. The bomb was armed. Now I just had to wait for the timer to run down. I walked into the grand ballroom. It was spectacular, I had to admit. The flowers were cascading orchids, costing $50,000 of my parents' retirement fund. The lighting provided by the fake company was actually just standard hotel lights with a few colored gels, certainly not worth the $25,000 he had invoiced. Grant was standing by the back entrance, wearing a headset. He didn't look like a guest. He looked like the owner. He gave me a subtle nod. Next to him stood a woman in a sharp black suit holding a briefcase. I knew who she was. She was the head of legal for the Holloway Group, the new owners of the venue management contract, and behind her, standing discreetly in the shadows of the service corridor, were 2 men in plain clothes who looked distinctly like federal agents. They weren't there to arrest him yet. They were there to observe. They wanted to see the money move. They wanted to see him accept the gifts. They wanted the full show. The guests started to arrive. I saw the CEO of Vanguard Solutions walk in, looking important and slightly bored. Evan practically sprinted across the room to shake his hand, beaming like he had just won the lottery. "Sir, so glad you could make it," Evan boomed. "This is going to be a night to remember." "I am sure it will be, Brooks," the CEO said, unaware that his phone was about to buzz with a call from his general counsel. I stood by the bar, sipping a club soda. My mother rushed past me, breathless. "Harper, why aren't you sitting down? The ceremony is starting in 10 minutes. Fix your hair. You look like a mess." "I am fine, Mom," I said. "I am just watching the logistics." "Well, sit down," she hissed, "and try to look happy for your brother. This is his moment." "Oh, I am happy," I said. "I am very happy." I took my seat in the second row, the designated spot for the lesser sibling. The music swelled. The doors opened. Sloane walked down the aisle, looking like a tragic queen marching to the guillotine. She caught my eye for a fraction of a second. I gave her a tiny wink. Evan stood at the altar, puffing out his chest. He looked invincible. He looked at me and smirked, a look that said, "I won. I took your date. I took their money, and I got away with it." I looked back at him, my face completely impassive. Enjoy it. Evan, I thought, enjoy the view from the top, because the drop is going to be spectacular. The ceremony began. The officiant droned on about love and honesty. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Grant slipped into the seat beside me. He took my hand under the pew. His thumb brushed against the gold band I was hiding in my pocket. "The legal team has the packet," he whispered. "The venue manager has been briefed. The trapdoor is unlocked." "When?" I asked. "The toast," Grant said. "When he takes the microphone to brag. That is when we cut the feed." I looked at the spotlight hitting my brother's face. He was basking in it. He loved the light. He loved being seen. But he forgot the one rule of the spotlight. When it is shining in your eyes, you can't see who is standing in the dark, waiting to pull the switch. And tonight, the person in the dark wasn't just his little sister. It was his judge, his jury, and his executioner. The reception hall of the saint. Regis was not just decorated, it was disguised. My brother had spent $50,000 on flowers to cover up the fact that the room was full of people who didn't actually like him. White orchids cascaded from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, and the tables were set with crystal that caught the light of the overpriced chandeliers. It smelled of expensive perfume and roasted duck, the scent of wealth that my parents had been chasing their entire lives. I stood by the entrance. Watching the room fill up, I wasn't wearing my usual sensible work clothes. I was wearing a floor-length emerald gown that cost more than my first car, a little treat to myself funded by the overtime pay from the investigation that was about to end my brother's career. For the first time, I didn't fade into the beige wallpaper. I stood out. My mother rushed past me, a glass of champagne tilting dangerously in her hand. She stopped, blinking at me as if she didn't recognize her own daughter. "Harper," she asked, her eyes scanning my dress. "You look expensive." "I am celebrating." "Mom," I said, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. "It is a big night." She didn't hear the edge in my voice. She just gestured wildly toward the head table. "Look at him. Look at your brother. The CEO has been talking to him for 20 minutes. This is it. Harper, the investment is finally paying off. After tonight, we are set." I followed her gaze. Evan was holding court near the dance floor, one hand in his pocket, the other gesturing expansively as he spoke to Mr. Sterling, the CEO of Vanguard Solutions. Evan looked like a king. He was laughing, touching people on the shoulder, radiating a manic confidence that was almost blinding. He believed his own lie. He really thought he had pulled it off. I checked my watch. It was 7:45 in the evening. The speeches were scheduled for 8 o'clock. I walked over to the audio-visual booth tucked in the back corner of the room. The tech guy, a bored 20-something wearing a headset, looked up as I approached. "Hey," I said, flashing my logistics manager smile. "I just need to check the file for the video presentation. Evan wanted to make sure the audio levels are balanced." "Sure," the kid said, sliding the laptop toward me. "It is queued up. File name is Evan_the_future.mp4. I suppressed a gag reflex and clicked on the file. It was a pre-produced video montage Evan had commissioned. I scrubbed through the timeline. It was a highlight reel of his life, ending with a graphic that faded in with the text, "New Director of Sales, Evan Brooks." He was planning to announce a promotion he hadn't received yet. He was going to force the CEO's hand publicly, gambling that Sterling wouldn't embarrass him in front of 300 guests. It was a bold, stupid, desperate move. "Actually," I said, reaching into my purse and pulling out a sleek black USB drive. "He sent me an updated version 5 minutes ago. The old one had a typo. Use this one instead." The tech guy shrugged. Whatever. As long as it plays. I plugged in the drive. I dragged the file named presentation_final_v2 into the playlist and deleted the old one. The kid didn't notice that the file size was significantly larger. He didn't notice that the thumbnail wasn't a picture of Evan smiling, but a dense graphic of a flowchart. You are all set, I said. When he gives the signal, when he raises his glass, you hit play. Got it, the kid said, turning back to his phone. I walked away, my heart hammering a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The trap was primed. I made my way to the gift table. It was piled high with envelopes and silver-wrapped boxes, offerings to the golden idol. I was carrying a heavy square box wrapped in simple matte black paper. I found a spot right at the front and placed it down. Inside that box wasn't a blender or a set of steak knives. It was a complete, printed copy of the forensic audit. It contained the emails where he approved the fraud. It contained the shell company registrations. It contained the affidavit from Sloan. And on top of the stack, I had placed a single sticky note that read, I followed the money, love, Harper. As I turned from the table, I caught Sloan's eye. She was sitting at the head table, looking pale but composed. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. When she saw me, her eyes widened slightly. It was a look of pure terror mixed with a desperate hope. She gave me a microscopic nod. She had done her part. She had kept him calm. She had walked down the aisle. She had led the lamb to the slaughter. I scanned the room for Grant. He was standing near the kitchen doors, speaking quietly to the venue manager. The manager looked serious, nodding as he listened to whatever Grant was saying. Grant caught my gaze across the room. He didn't smile. He just touched his tie, our signal. The venue was legally ours. The paperwork had cleared at 4 o'clock that afternoon. The moment Evan stepped onto that stage and used this facility to further a crime, he was in violation of the morality clause of a contract held by his own brother-in-law. Ladies and gentlemen, the DJ's voice boomed over the speakers. Please take your seats. It is time for the toasts. The room shifted. Chairs scraped against the floor. The murmur of conversation died down. My parents sat at the front table, their faces glowing with pride. My father poured more wine, leaning over to whisper something to the CEO, who was sitting politely next to them. Evan stood up. He adjusted his jacket. He picked up his champagne flute. He walked to the center of the dance floor, the spotlight swinging around to catch him in a pool of white light. He looked magnificent. He looked like success personified. Thank you, Evan said, his voice amplified and smooth. Thank you all for being here tonight. They say you can't choose your family, but you can choose your destiny. He paused for effect. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. Tonight is about love. Yes, Evan continued, smiling at Sloan, who forced a frozen smile back. But it is also about the future. It is about legacy. And tonight, I want to share a special moment with all of you. A moment that defines where the Brooks family is going. He raised his hand, pointing toward the large projection screen that descended from the ceiling behind him. I have prepared a little announcement, Evan said, his grin widening to a predatory gleam. Mr. Sterling, I hope you enjoy this. He looked at the AV booth. He nodded. I looked at Grant. Grant looked at the legal team standing in the shadows. The countdown in my head hit 0. Evan raised his glass high. To the future. The tech kid hit the spacebar. The screen flickered to life. But the triumphant music Evan had chosen didn't play. There was no fanfare. There was just a stark, high-contrast image that filled the 20-foot screen. It wasn't a picture of Evan. It was a bank statement. The room went silent. Not the polite silence of a listening crowd, but the confused, heavy silence of a crowd that realizes something is wrong. Evan's smile faltered. He turned around to look at the screen, expecting to see his own face. Instead, he saw the logo of Lumiere Ambiance lighting next to a routing number that matched his own personal checking account. The floor hadn't just disappeared. I had disintegrated it. Tonight, I become who I was always meant to be, Evan announced, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom. He held his champagne flute aloft, catching the light. A leader, a visionary, and the man who carries the Brooks name into a new era. The guests applauded politely. My parents were beaming, tears of joy streaming down my mother's face. She squeezed my father's hand, whispering something that looked like, "We did it." They truly believed this was the summit of their lives. And now, Evan smiled, gesturing to the screen behind him with a flourish. I want to show you exactly what that future looks like. The screen flickered. The image of the bank statement from the routing number transfer vanished, replaced instantly by a stark white slide with bold black text. It didn't feature a picture of Evan. It didn't have festive borders. It read, "Internal findings, vendor fraud, misappropriation of corporate funds. Subject, Evan Brooks. Status, active federal investigation." The applause died instantly. A murmur of confusion rippled through the room like a cold wind. Evan froze, his arms still raised, his smile twitching into a confused grimace. He turned around, saw the text, and let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. "All right, very funny," he stammered, turning back to the crowd. "Looks like the tech guys are playing a prank on the groom, classic roasting humor. Cut the feed. Guys, put the real video up." He glared at the audio-visual booth. The tech kid was frantically clicking his mouse, but he wasn't doing anything. He held up his hands in surrender. The system was locked. "Cut it," Evan screamed, his voice cracking. "Turn it off." "They can't turn it off. Evan," a deep voice cut through the panic. Grant stepped out from the shadows near the kitchen. He wasn't wearing a headset anymore. He walked onto the dance floor with the authority of a man inspecting his own property. "The system is under administrative lock," Grant said calmly, "courtesy of the venue management." "Who do you think you are?" Evan spat, stepping off the stage to confront him. "You are just a handyman. Get out of my wedding." "Actually," a woman's voice rang out from the main entrance, "he is the owner, and this isn't a wedding anymore. It is a crime scene." The double doors swung open. The general counsel for Vanguard Solutions walked in, flanked by two uniformed officers and a man in a suit who flashed a federal badge. The music stopped completely. The silence was absolute. Mr. Sterling, the CEO, stood up slowly from the head table. His face was purple with rage. He looked at the screen, then at Evan. "Brooks," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Is that my company's internal audit header?" Evan turned pale. "Sir, no. This is a mistake. My sister, she is jealous. She hacked the system. She is trying to ruin me." My mother stood up, knocking her chair over. "Harper!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "What have you done? Fix this immediately. How dare you humiliate your brother?" "I didn't do this, Mom," I said, stepping forward. I didn't walk to the family table. I walked to the center of the floor, standing next to the legal team. "I just organized the logistics. Remember, you told me to handle the details." I nodded to the tech booth. The slide changed. It showed a scanned invoice. Lumiere Ambiance Lighting, $25,000. Below it was a zoomed-in image of the signature line. "This is an invoice for lighting," I said, my voice steady and clear, projecting to the back of the room. "But Lumiere Ambiance isn't a lighting company. It is a shell entity dissolved 2 years ago. And the routing number for the deposit." The slide changed again. It showed a side-by-side comparison of the vendor account and Evan's personal checking account. The numbers were identical. "The money didn't go to a lighting technician," I continued. "It went to Evan. He stole $50,000 from Mom and Dad's retirement fund, laundered it through a fake vendor, and put it right back in his pocket." "Liar," my father shouted, his face gray with shock. "Evan wouldn't do that. He is a director." "He is not a director, Mr." Sterling barked. "He is a thief. We have been tracking these irregularities for months, but we couldn't find the internal link until tonight." Evan looked around wildly. The trap had snapped shut. He pointed a shaking hand at his groomsman table. It wasn't me. It was Kyle. Kyle set up the accounts. I just signed what he gave me. Twist number 8. Evan, I said softly. The screen changed one last time. It showed an email chain. From Evan Brooks to Kylum_88 message. I don't care if the risk is high. Rush the transfer. I need the cash in the Cayman account before the wedding. If anyone asks, blame the intern. There is no Kyle, I said. We traced the IP address of that email account. It was accessed from your phone. You sent that email to yourself to create a paper trail. You signed the approvals. You authorized the rush transfers. It is all you. It is not my opinion, I said, looking him dead in the eye. It is the trail. Evan let out a guttural roar. The facade of the Golden Boy shattered completely. He grabbed a heavy candelabra from the nearest table and lunged at the screen, swinging it wildly, trying to smash the evidence, trying to destroy the truth physically because he couldn't fight it logically. Shut it off, he screamed, swinging the metal stand. Glass shattered. Guests screamed and scrambled back. The 2 officers moved instantly. One tackled Evan from the side, sending the candelabra clattering across the floor. The other pinned his arms behind his back. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was louder than any toast he could have given. Evan Brooks, the federal agent said, reading him his rights as he was hauled to his feet. You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. My mother collapsed into her chair, sobbing. My father stood there, staring at his son in handcuffs, his dream of a legacy dissolving into a nightmare. Then, the reality of the money hit them. The deposit, my father yelled, turning to Grant. We paid $60,000 for this venue. If you are the owner, give it back. The wedding is ruined. We want a refund. Grant stepped forward, looking at the man who had dismissed him for years. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. The contract. Clause 14B, Grant read calmly. If the event is funded by illicit means, or if the client engages in criminal activity on the premises, the contract is void, and all deposits are forfeited as liquidated damages. He handed the paper to my father. You invested in a criminal enterprise, sir, Grant said. Your investment is gone. There are no refunds for fraud. My parents looked at me, their eyes full of betrayal and ruin. How could you? My mother whispered. He is your brother. You were supposed to be his bridesmaid. I looked down at my left hand. I slowly lifted it, letting the stage lights catch the simple gold band on my ring finger. The guests gasped as they realized what it meant. I was never his bridesmaid, I said, and I am not Harper Brooks anymore. I am Harper Holloway. I got married this morning. I walked over to Evan, who was being dragged toward the exit by the police. He looked at me with pure hatred, his face red and sweaty, his hair wild. You ruined everything, he spat. You jealous little witch. You stole my spotlight. I leaned in close, so only he could hear me over the chaos of his own destruction. You stole my date to bury me, I whispered. But all you buried was yourself. I turned my back on him and walked toward my husband. Grant put his arm around me, and together, we walked out of the street. Regis, leaving the wreckage of the Brooks family legacy behind us. The air outside was cool and clean. It smelled like freedom. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you enjoyed this revenge saga, please comment below and let me know where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts on how Harper handled her brother. Don't forget to subscribe to Morgan Revenge Stories. Like the video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people. See you in the next one.